Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating, kind of bizarre piece of history hidden inside a very rare medical document. We're looking at what seems like just an ordinary 1854 reprint of an old book, but it actually holds this completely forgotten story about public health, politics, and a pretty desperate medical struggle. Okay, let's dive into this. Back in 1951, a researcher named Edward Ford published a really fascinating paper. He had basically uncovered the strange history behind a mysterious 1854 government reprint in Sydney, Australia. And the book they decided to reprint? It was Edward Jenner's world-famous 1798 work on the cowpox vaccine, officially titled An Inquiry into the Causes and Effects of the Variola Vaccine. But the big question Ford asked, and the one we're asking today, is why? Why did the Sydney government suddenly feel the pressing need to reprint a 50-year-old British medical book for official distribution?
Well, to answer that, we actually have to look really closely at the books themselves. The creators of the Sydney reprint claimed it was a perfect facsimile, an exact duplicate in size, type, and its 4 colored plates. But when you put them side by side, some really curious differences pop up. The original 1798 editions featured a half-title page, specific artist names, and they used that old long S typography that kind of looks like an F. But the Sydney reprint deliberately stripped out that half-title and the artist names. They corrected errors from the original corrections page, and most importantly, they added a brand new one-page preface. Now, this newly added preface is absolutely the smoking gun here. It really deepens the mystery and points directly to the true political purpose behind the whole publication.
So, the backstory to all of this actually starts with a massive early success. Jenner's inquiry was published in London in 1798, and the vaccine arrived in Port Jackson, Australia shortly after that. In the early 1800s, Principal Surgeon Thomas Jameson and a few others successfully performed the very first voluntary vaccinations. I mean, it was a total medical triumph. But here's the tragic irony of the whole situation. By 1860, while literally all other Australian colonies, except New South Wales and Queensland, had enacted laws for compulsory vaccination just like Britain did, New South Wales stubbornly refused. Voluntary vaccination efforts had drastically dwindled by that point, leaving the population incredibly vulnerable. Now, you might be wondering, why the resistance? Why on earth ignore the absolute best medical advice of the time? Well, in 1898, Dr. Tidswell documented exactly why the New South Wales public and politicians pushed back so hard against the medical consensus. State politics and public fears had basically created a perfect storm. For starters, there were deep public fears of accidentally inoculating people with syphilis or other diseases. There were also these occasional high-profile cases where the vaccination just failed to stop the spread of smallpox. But perhaps the most fatal flaw? There was this undue, heavy reliance on maritime quarantine. Basically, they honestly thought that just blocking ships at the port would be enough to keep them safe. And this was made even worse by the total absence of a federal quarantine organization. They were essentially relying on leaky borders instead of proven medicine. And as you can probably guess, the grim consequences of that political inaction wouldn't stay hidden forever. For years, New South Wales thought they were completely safe just because smallpox hadn't hit them hard yet. But then, the inevitable happened. In 1877, a highly vulnerable Sydney was struck with 12 cases and up to 5 deaths. And then came 1881 to 1882. This was the most serious epidemic ever reported in Australia at that time, 154 cases and 40 deaths. A few years later, in 1884 to 1885, another 64 cases and 4 deaths popped up. These severe outbreaks rapidly shook public confidence. That dangerous illusion of safety provided by maritime quarantine? Yeah, it was completely shattered. Now, what's really interesting about this whole response is how the medical community fought back against that apathy. They didn't just throw up their hands and give up, right? Influential medical pioneers, guys like Dr. George Bennett, Dr. Charles McKellar, and Dr. John Creed, they went directly to the Premier, Alexander Stewart, and practically demanded action. Dr. McKellar even published an animal vaccination pamphlet in 1882 to really push the cause. But even more remarkably, they dusted off Jenner's original inquiry and officially reprinted it. They actually distributed these historic documents to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the safety and absolute necessity of the vaccine. The sheer frustration of these doctors is honestly incredibly palpable. You can feel it. Just listen to this trenchant quote from Dr. John Creed. He was an editor for the Australian Medical Gazette and actually the most likely author of the reprint's mysterious new preface. He wrote,
The benefits of vaccination being so self-evident that, except some few persons blinded by prejudice or erroneous notions, no one can hesitate to admit that they are wholly invaluable. I mean, wow. You can hear the pure exasperation in his words. He was dealing with a political system and a public that was just blinded by erroneous notions, and he was desperately trying to use the undeniable facts of Jenner's original work to cut right through that prejudice.
Yet despite all of this massive effort, it really just became a forgotten health battle. The medical community provided totally undeniable evidence. They literally reprinted Jenner's work to explicitly show, quote, the evidence upon which vaccination was adopted by every civilized government in the world. They had severe epidemics right there in their own city, proving the absolute danger of inaction. But local politicians, they remained completely unmoved. Year after year, successive presidents of the Board of Health urged the passing of a vaccination law. But New South Wales remained a unique holdout. They were one of the very few British legislatures to never adopt such a measure at the time. So this brings us to a really profound, timeless question to wrap up our explainer today. What happens when undeniable scientific evidence collides directly with stubborn political will? The Sydney reprint wasn't just some simple copy of an old book. It was a desperate, highly calculated tool used by frustrated doctors who were fighting a losing battle against political apathy. It really reminds us that having the best science in the world just isn't always enough if the political and public landscape isn't actually ready to accept it. Thanks so much for joining me in uncovering this hidden piece of history. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.